So I think by now some of you who follow my channel know that I like to do phone reviews for not only the more popular models, but more importantly, the more affordable ones. I think it's quite exciting to find hidden gems out there that offer great value for money without compromising much on performance features. I think this guy that I have with me here today fits that bill quite well. So here we go once again. I'm Yang, aka Hamster, aka TechRodent, and here is my review on the Lenovo P2. The Lenovo P2 packs a frugal Snapdragon 625 that is mated with 4GB of RAM. As usual with this SoC, you get an Adreno 506 for the GPU. You get 32GB of internal storage to mess around with, and if that's not enough, you get a micro SD slot as well. If you're willing to give up that slot though, you can stick in a second SIM card as this phone is dual SIM capable. Finally, for the battery, this sucker packs a mean 5100 mAh of power, making it the size of many power banks out there. Coupled with the Snapdragon 625, it should give us some impressive battery life numbers, but we'll check that out later on. Let's do a quick unboxing. Lifting up the top lid, we're first greeted with the phone. Picking up the phone, Lenovo has decided to give a clear polycarbonate case together in the box, and my phone came with it on. Below that, they also provide a screen protector for you, but I threw mine away as I found it to be rubbish. Moving lower, we find a SIM eject pin together with some manuals in a box. The wall charger that has quick charging, though it uses Lenovo's proprietary charging technology instead of anything by Qualcomm, so you won't get any quick charging if you're using any QC charger. A micro USB cable, an OTG adapter, and a pair of bundled headphones. You don't see these ones too often anymore. Let's move on to the phone. First up, the front. Up top we find the usual deal with the phone's sensors, the call receiver and the 5-megapixel selfie shooter. Display wise, as this is an AMOLED display, the viewing angles are great and colors are punchy, though if I had to complain, it really doesn't get bright enough compared to the AMOLED king of displays, Samsung. Here it is beside my S7 Edge, and you can see that color wise they are quite similar, but the P2 just looks darker in comparison. Moving on from the display, we have the fingerprint sensor that serves your biometric security needs and does so with good speed and precision too. Also, you can unlock the phone straight from a screen off state, which is a nice touch. Top of the phone, you'll find a 3.5mm headphone jack for all your music listening needs and the secondary noise cancelling microphone. To the bottom, you'll find bottom firing speakers together with the micro USB jack that has an interesting yellow color to it. Left of the phone, you'll find the SIM slot and an interesting ultimate power saver button. Taking a closer look at that SIM tray, it's a hybrid design that fits either 2 SIM cards or swap out the second SIM for a micro SD. Flipping on the ultimate power saver button switches your phone instantly into that mode, though I'm not too sure how useful this is. I'd much rather have this as a toggle on the notification drawer and have that button maybe serve as a mute button instead. Taking a look at the other side, right of the phone is where you'll find the volume rocker and the power button. And finally, to the back of the phone, you'll find the 13-megapixel shooter with a 1.12 micron pixel size paired with an f2.0 lens, the flash module, and to the bottom the Lenovo logo together with another bit of interesting information. An interesting subtext that says, manufactured by Motorola Mobility. Now that we've got the exterior covered, let's take a look at the software. From the lock screen, you can swipe up the left corner to fire up the phone's assistant, right for the camera, or just swipe from center to unlock the phone. Looking at the UI, apart from some theming over the icons, the phone feels excessively like stock Android, which is a good thing. Performance wise is good with the phone zipping around really well without any lags or stuttering, and as far as pre-installed bloat goes, aside from apps like the usual Google Suite, you have bundled apps like McAfee, Skype, SyncIt, Share It, a theme center, and UC browser, which is quite minimal in my opinion. The notification dropdown and toggles are very much stock Android style with the option to reorder them as you wish. And moving into settings, the phone as I got it is running on Android 7.0 Nougat on the February 1st patch. It's not Android 7.1.2, but it's still good by all means. Now, I'm not much for performance benchmarks these days, but some people still like to see them, so here are some numbers for you guys to ponder upon. For the gaming benchmarks, I did try to run GFX Bench, but that didn't turn out very well, I'm not too sure why. Benchmark numbers aside though, I think that most people will find that this phone will provide them an adequate gaming experience, provided you're not pushing really demanding mobile games on it. Let's move on to the camera experience. UI wise, it's rather straightforward. Tapping the settings button on the top left gives you a list of settings you can change. By default, smart mode is enabled, which decides if a scene requires some HDR work or not, and tapping the video record button brings up the video recording UI. My only gripe is that I would have liked it to start recording straight away rather than needing another button to press. You can also tap the bottom left corner for some additional shooting modes. HDR specifically can be a bit interesting as by default it is set to classic, though you have 3 more types that you can set them to, and I'll talk about them in just a bit. Starting out the sample footage, we're doing some daylight photography. The phone seems to be able to do quite a close macro distance, which is great, and in turn gives you a bokeh background effect. It's not the prettiest bokeh, but it's still present. White balancing and colors look great, true to the scene. Photos come out adequately sharp with the scene not being too over or underexposed. Slapping on HDR seems to help quite a bit in bringing back some of those darker shadows and overblown highlights without oversaturating the image, making it look unrealistic, so it definitely helps. The only issue is that taking HDR photos is not instant, so if you or the subject isn't perfectly still, some ghosting may occur as evident in the buds and leaves above. Moving into more shaded areas, most phones struggle to keep white balancing correct, often with the final images looking way too cold or bluish, but the P2 handles it quite well, if not just a little bit cold. As scenes get darker though, HDR becomes a bit harder to pull off, which made non-HDR photos sharper, though lacking a bit of details in the highlights in this sample. This next one demos the capability of HDR processing quite well, as when taken normally, the slipper and the darker seam between the slab is a bit darker, where the wall on top is too bright. Switching on HDR, we see these details come back, though overall, I hoped the image was a bit brighter. Here are a few more samples before we explore HDR a bit more. Our first HDR test sample is with this plant. Switching on HDR and using the default classic setting, we see that the plant in the center is much brighter now, with the moss below it less blown out in highlights, making for a much more pleasing image. Switching to automobile HDR and oh my god, it's a mess! Okay, moving on. Still Life HDR gave much more aggressive HDR in comparison to Classic, looking much nicer in my opinion, while being a tad brighter, so I would definitely use it in much more high contrast shooting scenarios. Finally, City HDR gives that really oversaturated image like Automobile, and while it's not as intense as Automobile, I still don't think it's one of my favorites. Here's more HDR samples. On to more challenging indoor lighting scenarios. Shooting normally, the droid is in darkness. Switching to HDR Classic brings it back a little, though the glow effect is more accentuated. Automobile is unusable, still HDR brings back the droid a bit once more, though the glow above its head is more pronounced, and City again is unusable. In my opinion, Classic was the better balance. Trying out some flash photography, turning HDR on gave a much brighter image, though keeping still again was quite challenging, and turning on flash illuminated the droid quite alright, but threw the background into darkness sadly. Finally, some night photography. Normal was way too dark to be usable sadly. HDR Classic brought back more details, but again, still too dark to be used. HDR Automobile is still terrible. Still HDR did the best here, illuminating the scene adequately enough, and City, while not terrible, still loses out to Still HDR for me. Bear in mind that as shooting conditions get darker, the noise levels start increasing substantially, while the sharpness takes quite a nosedive as well due to denoising. Before we close this section, here's a sample picture of this charming little pupper. Let's see how video stacks up. What's up guys, Yang here aka TechRodent, and this is some 4K sample footage from the Lenovo P2, and as you can see, footage it actually looks pretty good. The only thing is that there isn't any video stabilization of any sorts as I can see, but yeah, quality wise I think it's pretty top notch. Let's move on to the star of the show. Everyone is probably wondering how well this phone lasts in day-to-day use, and I think the answer is amazingly. The combination of the 5000 mAh battery and the Snapdragon 625 under PC Mark Work 2.0 battery life benchmark gave me a result of 19 hours and 35 minutes, bearing in mind that the screen was on and workloads were being processed the whole time. So that's some pretty impressive numbers. So where does that leave us with the Lenovo P2? Right out of the gate, I think most people will know that with Lenovo pairing the Snapdragon 625 with a 5000 mAh battery, this phone is meant to be a marathon runner, not a time-lapse sprinter. It'll easily last you a day of usage, heck maybe even 2 or 3, and it doesn't even really sacrifice on performance to do so. It doesn't come with the usual bloatware that is associated with Lenovo devices, it's got a pretty respectable shooter, and it has a nice AMOLED display to go along with that. Sure, it's not without its flaws. That AMOLED display doesn't get bright enough, that camera doesn't do that well in low light, the design, while unoffensive, is uninspired, but I feel that the P2 isn't looking to change the world, but rather it just wants to be able to be there for you when you need it, and not have to carry around an additional power bank or tether to your wall. With that, I think I can give this phone the TechRodent recommended seal of approval, especially if you're someone who maybe travels a lot and don't have access to a ready power point, or maybe just don't like carrying a battery bank around. I hope you guys liked this review, and if you did, drop me a like, maybe share this video along, and if you didn't, well, you can put a dislike and maybe tell me where I can improve on it. My name is Yang aka Hamster aka TechRodent, and have a good one guys.